Mastery of self. So where this fits in is if we look at the first 2 points of the 13 things to do to move from survive to thrive. The first 2 points are around vision and life plan, right? And mastery of self really comes into play around the role that you play in your business. So let's put this into context. So I call it the mastery of self as opposed to the mastery of time, because really time is not something that we can master. We can only master what we do with time. So mastery sits at the foundation level of the 6 steps that we need to take to build a really successful business. And it is about eliminating the chaos in our business environment. And typically chaos is things like not enough time, problems with goals or achieving goals, problems with the financial bits, and that's what we spoke about yesterday, problems with the team, etc., etc. So at the mastery level, we talk about eliminating chaos and bringing stability into the business. And it really is where we establish the commercial principles of the business, the commercial principles of the enterprise. So there are 4 areas to mastery. It's destination mastery, money mastery, time mastery or self-mastery, and then delivery mastery. So we've done destination, we've done money. We're now going to talk about the mastery of self, or the mastery of self in time. So time definitely is a unit of measure. It's not a measure of value. Time in itself doesn't actually have value. It only gets its value from what we do with it. And I'll speak a little bit later about spending time versus investing time. But this is also something around the value that you bring to your business. So when we start to define the value we bring into our business, we start to define the sort of things that A, are worth our time doing, and B, are basically building into the business in such a way that it brings back a return. So it's one of the first things that I always ask clients to consider is, what is the value that you bring to your business? And I remember doing this with a business owner a couple of months ago, and asking, what role they played in the business. And she said to me, well, I do this and I look after that team and I look after this team. And I asked her the question, I said, so what is the value that you bring into your business? And after a little bit of backwards and forwardsing on that, she really came to the realization that actually she had never defined the value that she delivers to her business. And because of that, it was very hard for her to then bring across things like her vision, her operational excellence, being able to align the team behind certain things, and at the same time also make informed choices on the actions that she gets involved in the business versus the activities that she doesn't need to or shouldn't actually even be getting involved in the business. So it comes into, it comes into importance because when we look at the cycle of business, there basically are 4 areas in the business that have impact. The first one is the owner, and the owner is the kingpin. The owner is the one that holds the entire business together. So typically what happens is we see a space where the owner looks after the team, the owner looks after the customers, and the owner looks after the business. So what do we mean by that? Well, the owner typically hires the team. The owner looks after whether the team is doing their job, manages everything from marketing to production to delivery to orders, probably even invoicing, etc., and is really an integral part of what it is that their team does. Typically, then the owner is also involved with customers, whether that is sales, whether that's customer relationships, looking after key accounts. And many times when I ask business owners, first-time clients of mine, what is some of the value proposition that you bring to the sector, to the industry, that your business offers? Many times they say to me, well, the thing is that my customers have direct access to me. They have direct access to the people who own this business. And while that sounds great to the business owner, it's a very clear indication that they don't really value the time, or they haven't come to realize their value in the business, because pretty much nobody needs to have direct access to an owner if there is a strong team in place. If clients and customers need to access the owner, then there's a breakdown in the system around the delivery of the team. So relationships, yep, I get that, but then you have to ask yourself, why does that need to be in place? And then usually the owner is looking after the business as well. You know, they're looking after the VAT receipts, they're looking after the invoicing to clients, they're looking after the banking, they're looking after all of those sorts of things. And this is one of the reasons why very often I find that businesses or business owners are saying, I don't have enough time in the day to do the things that I need to do. And the reason is because they're doing everything. And so here on this cycle, actually, it very clearly shows what the owner actually should be doing. The only area where the owner should be involved in the business is that the owner looks after the team. And effectively, that is where it stops. So the owner sets the direction, sets the vision, sets the goals, sets the parameters of the business, sets the direction for systems, and then the team takes over from there. The team handles the production, handles the marketing, services the customers, looks after the customers. The customers in turn look after the business. They look after the business through paying bills on time, through generating revenue, potentially through referrals, etc. And the business in turn looks after the owner, because then, of course, again, we have the situation where the owner's life plan is enabled by the business plan, which in turn is enabled by the marketing plan. And this is very often a contentious conversation with business owners, because they often feel that they do need to be in control of everything, because A, nobody can do it like they do. B, it's their business, it's their baby, it's the thing that they really look after. And so sometimes there are some trust issues that come into play there. But if we're talking about growth, and again, this is in the context of building a thriving business, then we have to build a team around the capabilities of the owner in order to grow the business through growing customers and growing revenue. So that's what the ideal cycle of business should look like. Owner looks after the team, team looks after the customers, customers look after the business looks after the owner. Okay. Then we get to a little thing called the point of power. Now, why the point of power is important when we're talking about management of self is because the point of power determines how we react and how we respond in certain situations. So this links into the previous slide because it talks about our self-awareness, it talks about the value we place on ourselves, and it talks about our mindset and our outlook in managing our business. So below the point of power, we've bounced out a little bit there. Below the point of power, we talk about being in a situation of blame, excuses, and denial, or BED, very useful acronym, because that's where most people then choose to stay, is in bed with the covers pulled over their heads, because they really don't want to face the world. And they don't want to face the world because nothing that has happened to them or their business is their fault. It's somebody else's fault. It's because of so-and-so that I can't do this. It's because of these circumstances that I can't do this. It's because of this bloody lockdown that I can't go out and market to my clients. So everybody else carries the blame other than me for either my own lack of will, my own laziness, my own range of excuses that I come up with. The E then is, as it says there, for excuses. And that is, I couldn't do this because I was really busy today and I didn't actually have much time for anything else. And this really took up all of my time. And ultimately, I wasn't able to get there. So, yeah, sometimes that's reality. But when that becomes the reason why we didn't do something, it's an excuse. And typically, as adults, when we talk about being below the point of power, we refer to it in a very nice word. We call it reasons. There are reasons that things didn't happen. And then, of course, there's the denial piece. And the denial piece is often about taking the viewpoint that, if I leave this, it will get better. So in that space, we're seeing a lot of that now, where people are talking about, oh, this lockdown, this too shall pass. Eventually it will get better, and maybe it won't be so bad, and I'll see what things look like at the end, and then I can make some decisions around that. And as I've pointed out in the previous session, that's what I call the nosedivers. Those are the people who aren't actually going to make it out of this. But then we get above the point of power. And above the point of power, we have the areas of responsibility, accountability, and ownership. And what I really like about this is, below the point of power, you have BED, you have bed, you have inactivity, you have self-pity, you have just stagnation. Actually, it's literally almost that idea of you've made your bed, now lie in it. Above the point of power, with ownership, accountability, and responsibility, we've got the awe. And the awe is incredibly powerful because not only can it move us forward, as in the awe of a canoe or a dinghy, etc., but it can also help provide us direction. If we row only on one side, the dinghy moves in a particular direction. If we hold the oar in the water on another side, we can steer where we're going in another direction. So responsibility is where we take on the notion that we have to do something. And we know that we are the ones who have to actually do it. So that's accepting the responsibility for action. The accountability side is where we understand that our actions feed into our goals, and we remain accountable to our goals because our goals are there to achieve in the business, which is there to achieve against our life plan. And this is often a tricky conversation in the coaching environment, because you'll hear some people talk about being held accountable. The coach is there to hold you accountable to your certain actions, or managers hold their teams accountable. Well, the reality is, as soon as you hold somebody else accountable, you take accountability away from them, because now they become accountable to you, not to themselves, not to the target, not to the goal. But they do things not necessarily because they believe in them, but because there's either a punishment or a consequence, or because somebody else is making them do it. And when somebody else makes you do something, it takes away the ownership. And ownership in this conversation is extremely important, because in the ownership space, we take ownership of the goals, we take ownership of the plan, we take ownership of the objective, of our business plan, of our life plan. And once we take ownership, we take active management of something. We nurture it, we steward it, we look after it, we grow it. And the thing is that if we don't do that, we typically then again end up below the point of power. We end up in a space of blame. I wasn't able to do this because of that. These are my reasons for not achieving against my goals. And ownership allows us, when we take on ownership allows us to amend goals based on being exposed to new data, being exposed to new experiences, not because we haven't done something, but because new data tells us something different. So let's take the situation we're in right now. Most business owners have maybe started this year with a financial plan, with the projection of what their first quarter looks like, projection of what the first half looks like, or the 12 months of the financial year looks like. Along comes this thing called coronavirus, COVID-19, country goes into lockdown, world basically comes to a standstill. So we can continue to try and service the goals that we set out, and in so doing, missteer our organization, missteer our business, and completely miss our goals because there are certain things we haven't taken into account. Playing in a position of ownership allows us to be able to adapt the goal based on new data. So we now go, well, actually my clients aren't buying as much any longer because they're not able to get to where my service or my product is available. So therefore I need to change my marketing plan. I need to adapt my goals to what my consumer base or my customer base is now able to do. And we can only do that in an ownership environment. When we've set the plan, when we nurture the plan, when we steward the goals, when we steward the actions, and we are actively driving the delivery of that. We change based on new information, not based on inactivity or opportunities missed. So when we operate below the point of power, we typically operate in a very powerless environment. It is disempowering, while operating above the point of power is a much more empowering scenario because it is proactive, it is positive, it is accountability driven, but more than that, it is ownership driven. So 99% of the time, we should be looking to operate in an above the point of power situation. Now, reality is that's not always going to be possible. If we try to operate in that space, we'd all either be raging alcoholics or we'd be addicted to Xanax and Prozac and all the rest of those things, because you just cannot maintain that level of blissful positivity, come what may type of scenario. So yeah, we accept that occasionally we will dip below the point of power. But the key there is how quickly we pull ourselves back up into a responsibility, accountability, and ownership point of view. The moment we stay below the point, we tend to dip further and further and further, and then the comeback position is a lot harder to achieve. So yeah, by virtue of life, by virtue of circumstance, things that happen to us, we will often take a dip below the point of power. But when we're aware of where we're at, it is a lot easier to get ourselves back into the position of control. And that's really what it is, empowered control, when we understand where we sit versus the point of power. Okay, and this really is the crux of self-management. So if you look on the lower left-hand side, there's a question that says, how do you value your time? How you value your time, and I spoke about this before, is the role that you play in your own life and the role that you play in your organization. So the typical example here is of the business owner who manages their own finances, who does their own books every month, who does the invoicing, receives the income, does all of those things. And when we were talking about money mastery, one of the things we spoke about was the cash gap. And the cash gap is the time between when you've sent out your invoice and when you actually receipt the payment of the invoice. So in other words, if you invoice on the 1st of the month and your customers are on 30-day payment terms, then you can expect to be paid on the 1st of the following month or the end of that month of invoicing at the earliest, right? So what that does is, if you delay your invoicing, then your cash gap tends to get longer. And this is what happens with business owners who do everything themselves. If you remember the wheel, they're the ones who look after the team, look after the customers, and look after the business. So we then tend to typically bundle things into tasks. And we say, well, you know what? I'm going to invoice every 2 weeks. I'm going to set time aside. I bundle all of my invoicing and I invoice every 2 weeks. So you delivered the service on the 1st of the month. You invoice 14 days later, which means that your clients pay you within 30 days. They're going to pay you 30 days on from that. So actually, they're paying 6 weeks after you've delivered the service. And what you're doing there is you're extending your cash gap, which should be 30 days, but now becomes 6 weeks. So when you think to yourself, and you ask most business owners, and they say, well, the reason I do my invoicing myself is because I can't afford to pay a bookkeeper or an admin clerk, right? So I do all the invoicing myself. So here's the question. How much does an admin clerk cost you, or a bookkeeper cost you to do your books? Well, maybe around 500 Rand an hour, maybe 750, maybe 1,000 Rand an hour if they're really, really awesome, right? And then you ask yourself, well, what's my value in my business? What is the value of my time? Well, the simple way to calculate that is look at how much you take out of your business as a salary and divide that by 22 working days of the month, and that gives you a daily value. Divide that by 8, and that gives you an hourly value for your time. So your hourly value might come down to something like, let's say, 2,500 Rand, 3,500 Rand, maybe 4,000 or 5,000 Rand an hour actually is your value to your business. So you look at that and you say, well, if you're spending 2 hours doing invoicing, that's 10 grand of your time versus 1,000 Rand or 2,000 Rand for an admin clerk, where your time should be spent on marketing, building, and delivering on your business. Can you really then say that you can't afford to have somebody else do your books, do your invoicing? So this is the reality of time management. And it's where I very often talk to business owners about time invested versus time spent. So the time spent are the things that we do because they need to be done. You know, how often do we go, whew, I've got so much filing to do, let me spend the morning and file this stuff. And then when it's done, by the time I break for lunch, I've had a very productive morning. Well, actually, no, you haven't. You've just had a very busy morning. The filing's not going to do anything for your business. It's not going to grow the business. It's not going to help you develop leads. It's not going to give you anything back. And that's the difference between time spent versus time invested. And when we value ourselves within our business versus the time that we have available, we understand that the time we invest in doing certain activities needs to bring a return. So if I spend 90 minutes, 2 hours, 2.5 hours every Friday morning at a BNI meeting, I'm not actually spending time there. I'm investing time. I'm investing time in relationships. I'm investing time in referral networks. I'm investing time in a virtual sales team, which is ultimately going to bring me back results. And that's the difference between time invested versus time spent. Time that we invest is time we spend working on our business. Time we spend is typically time we spend doing stuff. And what does that stuff look like? So we can do this almost as a circle. Well, not almost, as a circle. That's what's on the screen here. So typically, we can start on the outer circle and deal with things that are not urgent and not important. So in a typical workday, what is not urgent and what is not important? Spending time on Facebook, spending time on LinkedIn, unless it's part of your marketing strategy, that is ultimately a distraction. Typically, we have the action of we walk into our office or we shift in behind our laptops or our computers, and the very first app we open is email. And email tends to suck our time. 2 hours later, we're still working through emails. And what I always say to people is, unless your emails are your source of business leads or your source of orders, there's actually no reason why you should be doing your emails first thing in the morning. Because what it typically does is, A, it takes up time, and B, it tends to redirect you from what you may have planned for that day. And that then puts you behind the curve. So then we get into the blue circle, and the blue circle is urgent and not important. And this is the area we tend to call the delusional space. So what is the delusional space? Well, the delusional space is the thing that I can't get to work this morning because my desk is so cluttered. I've got papers everywhere. I have to just actually clear this. I have to file so that I can have a clear, clutter-free workspace and actually get on with the day stuff. So it's really urgent for me to clear this stuff off. But ultimately, it's not important. It's not important in the results you have to achieve that day. It's not important in the business that you have to accomplish. It's not important in working on your business. So that often puts us in that delusional space. As I said previously, we feel productive, but actually we've just been busy. We've been caught up in the busyness of the day. And then there's the urgent and important circle, which is the white one on the inside. The urgent and important circle is the one that usually is driven by demand. It's demand on our time. So what is urgent and important? Urgent and important are things like VAT. So your VAT return, your tax return, your reports that you potentially need to prepare either for shareholders, clients, etc. So why is it important? It's important because it's part of the functioning of your business. It's part of the compliance. It's part of your due diligence that you need to complete. Why is it urgent? Well, it's urgent because it's been set aside because of Facebook, because of emails, because of filing. It's important, but it hasn't been done, so it now demands time, and there's a deadline attached to it. So it now becomes urgent. And very often, this is not to take away from anybody, but this is typically the space where people go, but I work well under pressure. Well, no, not really. The only reason you work well under pressure is because you get off on the feeling of having had a challenge, dealing with that challenge, being super focused on one particular thing that needs to be done, that you are able to exclude all extractions. That's the only reason why people who claim to work well under pressure believe that they work well under pressure. It's just an indication that actually they haven't particularly planned very well, or they haven't serviced the important things in the business. As business owners, the place we want to play in is that hot zone in the middle. It's not urgent, but it's important. This is the area we're working on our business. And at the very least, it's 20% of our day. So it's not urgent because we're constantly managing it, but we're constantly managing it because it's important. So we're taking time to set goals. We're taking time to plan the minute steps that we need to take to constantly deliver on those goals. And once we're able to do that, we're in a much more controlled space. We're in an above the point of power space, and we are working on our business, not churning through busyness to actually work in the business. Right. And so that, in a very small, very concise nutshell, is the power of self-management, and the power of making the best of the time that we have available, whether it's in our day, whether it's in our month, whether it's in a quarter, half year, or a year. And this is where we see the value in breaking tasks down into small, manageable areas. And it's one of the reasons I say to business owners, know what your annual goal is, then know what that goal is per month, what the activity is per week that you have to achieve against that, and what the impact is per day that makes that possible. And the same feeds through on the valuing of self, and the valuing and the mastery of self in the time that we have available to us.